Welcome to a truly extraordinary edition of Baja 101 by Destino. I'm your host, Dana Jimenez. Today, we have the immense honor of hosting a distinguished guest whose contributions to the world of science has left a mark on our understanding of the universe. Joining us in the studio is none other than the Nobel Prize laureate. Dr. Smoot's journey through the cosmos of scientific discovery has been remarkable. Throughout his illustrious career, he has embarked on an odyssey that has led groundbreaking insights into the very fabric of the universe itself, inspiring generations of scientists and igniting the imagination of countless individuals worldwide. Stay tuned for a captivating conversation that promises to expand your horizons right here on XIFM 103.9. If you have questions for our guests, please send us a text to our WhatsApp at 624-192-103. And please visit the webpage georgefsmoot.com. So, Dr. Smoot, thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
We are so intrigued to talk to you today. It's such a pleasure. People are really curious about your Nobel Prize, which is a very big achievement that most people can only dream of. Can you please tell us more about it and how it has affected your life? Can you talk to us briefly about it? How was the process? How different life after winning a Nobel Prize?
I can?
Yes, of course.
Do you really want me to?
Please do.
Or do you want
do.
to find out why I came to Cabo before we get into this more extended discussion?
Yes, absolutely. Why?
What do you want first?
Let's do Cabo first.
Okay. So when I was younger, 25 years ago, I was very busy, working very hard. Little did I know, once I got the Nobel Prize, I got an extra job. Before I was being a professor and being head of a research group and doing big research projects. And then I got a whole separate new job added on. But I was looking for a place where I could go and just relax. And so I had been to Hawaii, I'd been to a number of other places. I've been traveling around the world a lot for my projects. And I came down here because they were having sort of timeshare sales, whatever it is. And I came down, and as soon as I got here, I felt my body relax. And it relaxed for two reasons. I liked the way the air was. I liked the mountains and the desert coming right down to the sea. So you had this nice balanced humidity. It wasn't like being in a steam room, and it wasn't like being in a sauna. It was like being in a nice environment. So that first relax. But second of all, I went and I was hanging out in the, by the beach on the seashore, and I could hear the waves coming in. And that's very relaxing at night, hearing the waves come in and so forth. And I started associating this place as a place to relax. And as a professor, one of the things is you have a school schedule. And there's always a time that starts at Christmas and goes to sometime in January where you're going to have time off and you can go someplace and do that. And so I said, I better buy a timeshare. And way over, they were doing a new timeshare over on the giant beach on the other side. You know what I'm talking about? And if you bought the timeshare before it was built, you got it at a reasonable price, although it wasn't a good investment. And then after I did that, the next year I thought, it's way better to think about buying a condo here or some land here and be here, because I could only see the place appreciating as the Mexican government and the local people built up this area. And even though there are things that aren't perfect, I mean, sometimes there are tourists making rowdy noises or anything, I find this a great place. And we find a really great condo that's got a view of the sea, but it's nice and quiet and relaxed. And we now complain when the people play music too loud or something. But then we can walk down the street or down the beach, and there's all this kind of exciting and interesting things going on, and the people on their water skis, jet skis, and there's all kind of activities. But you can go back home and sit under your deck and see the sea and do your work. And so I used to love and come because I could first take a break, and then I could pick a particular area of something to work on to try and finish a piece of work that I was doing because I had so many jobs going on. So those were the things. But there was another thing that was very important. That is, the local Mexican people here were very welcoming and they had great food. Whereas in other places I've been to, they're sometimes resistant. They have a little resentment towards the rich people coming in and enjoying themselves. Whereas here, most of the people don't have jobs if there aren't tourists. And most of them understand that, oh, we see it. So we spend time in Paris, and there they both resent the tourists, but depend on them very much for doing the economy of the city. Here, people seem more open to it and more understanding because they'd come from poor villages on the mainland and come over and got jobs and got built up here. Now, you'll eventually get people resentful that rich people are coming in, but the fact is, it's made this place blossom, maybe too much. But I love Cabo. When I get here, immediately I start feeling better.
This is one of the few places in the world that you have the ocean in front of you and the desert in your back.
Exactly, and you see the cactus go right down to the beach.
What activities do you enjoy doing here?
Here, the first thing is relaxing. The second is going out and trying the various, local foods. So yesterday was half price carnitas at the Michoacan restaurant. So we went to that. I love the seafood. The seafood here is very good. So I've worked out a deal with John where we will split a Veracruz shrimp cocktail and garlic ajillo. I forgot what's the word for octopus. Pulpa. Yes, I should remember that. Sorry. And we split that, and then it's too much to eat, but then I have a little left over and I have it after that. And so I really love the different Mexican foods. So we love going out to do that. We also go sightseeing. We went up to La Paz and went swimming with the whale sharks.
With the whale sharks.
And that was an interesting experience because it's more real, right? It isn't like you're getting in the pool with the dolphins and splashing around. This is like you get out and there's stuff going on. And I happened to see a very big manta ray.
Uh-huh.
And most people couldn't keep up with it swimming. There was only one person with us that could actually swim as fast as the manta ray was swimming. It's great to see the wildlife. So one day we've gone out and we're involved in, they have a citizen scientist kind of activity where you go out and count birds. It's a sort of a worldwide bird counting, survey. And so with one of our friends, Graciela, right, she arranged for us to go out with her, and there were several other people, and we went out and it was beautiful at the bird sanctuary up here in San Jose, and we counted birds, and we counted a lot of birds. I mean, there were herons and there were owls, there were a couple of hawks, there was many different things we saw. And it's a few hundred birds that we ended up seeing there, including the different ones diving in and catching fish and then jumping up out of the water with them and so on. And so it's the combination of being able to relax and do things now because the internet makes it possible to work here, but also to have the good food, the camaraderie, and to get a chance to go out and see the wildlife, right? It's not the wildlife of the partying tourists, it's the actual animals and birds and the whales, right? We had a whale tour this time that was very good, and we're on it, and we're on those little skiff boats. So I call them wave bouncers because you spend your time jumping from wave to wave. But we were out there and we saw two whales jumping, and then we saw two dolphins jumping over the two whales that were jumping. It was just a remarkable thing to see. We were up very close. We even have some good pictures of it, and Graciela took the best pictures, of course, but I have a little video and stuff. And those are things you just can't do other places.
When you're in front of the magnificent whales, it just makes you so humble and appreciative of this planet.
It shows you how beautiful and how complex and how nice nature can be. And especially if you're a person who grew up in a city and you never saw nature, it's amazing.
And also for food, we have wonderful organic farms and they have great quality, so that's also very healthy to do.
Yes. So they're much more conscious of that in Europe than they are in the United States. But in Mexico, there are places where people care very much about how the food is raised and.
In the area of Pescadero, there are many growers that are doing that, and then they can bring you to your doorsteps a box of organic produce. So that is really good. What other areas do you recommend or to visit? There's a Triunfo and other places here that you can go and visit for a day trip.
And I'm sure it depends on what people are really interested in. They're not like it, you go out, sightseeing and seeing the whales and seeing, but you can go. There's snorkeling you can do, except I find the water's just a little too cold for me. But it's beautiful things to see, and so those are day trips that you can make. There is a offshore around it's the new area, the whatever is area, where there is a underwater national park, and it is I'm told by everybody extremely beautiful and a nice area to go. And there are ships that will take you out there, and you just dive off of it. You stay on the ship and you just dive off the ship. And you can be there 2 or 3 days at a time, and so it's a lot. I have had colleagues that are from La Paz, and there we go, and we enjoy the seafront, but he grew up there as a child, and so he knew the separate beaches to go to and the special places, even though now La Paz has grown up to be much bigger than it used to be. So there are a lot of interesting areas to go to. It just depends on what your personal interests are and what you really want to do. And there's some people who want to go deep sea fishing. There's just lots of different activities that I think it's kind of fun. It's kind of good. And so my family was down here for the Christmas through New Year's kind of time period, and we took them on many different kind of things. They were the ones that went to La Paz, but we stopped. I can't remember the name of the restaurant along the way, but there's a beautiful restaurant as you're going out along the inner highway.
A La Garita. Oh, that's a
and
local
we had a
favorite.
tremendous experience because they come and make their own tortillas.
Oh, how nice.
And bake them and then eat them. And it was a tremendous experience for them to do that because it was very authentic food. And he claimed the best that he ever saw, where they wrap in the corn husks and bake the stuff inside. He said he'd never had anything that good, and he is really serious about going around and eating stuff. And they used to live in Geneva for some years before they came back to the United States. And they thought that was the best part of the trip, even though everything else we did that day was pretty outstanding and pretty spectacular. And but for me, mostly it's being here and being able to relax. This is the first time I've done an interview here, even though I was asked to do things in the past, because this was the place I could go and be anonymous and just be a regular person and do things, right? And do my work and not worry about stuff. And so.
Well, at Destino and here in Exa, we really appreciate you taking the time to share your experience because Los Cabos is such a magical place. When was it when you first came here? What year was that?
I'm trying to remember. It was about 23 years ago. I can't remember exactly. I could look it up probably, but it's changed a lot since then.
I was going to ask you about that.
I wish it was still smaller in a certain way, but in the other way, I think it's made possible for a lot of people to have richer lives than they would have had before. They've got jobs, they've learned stuff. It's not perfect, but at least the whole economy of the area has grown up, and things were. Now I remember when the Costco came in and thought, oh god, now I can get stuff. And then the Walmart came, and then and then it was like, well, at Home Depot not long after that, and I'm going, oh, this is getting too civilized.
It made life easier too.
It made life a lot easier because you could get the things you needed to fix up your living space. You can do other things, right? You can buy good food and so forth. Good and bad, right? It takes away from the original flavor and nature, but on the other hand, it enriches a lot of people's lives. And I think as long as people can keep the culture here reasonably, right, and move in the future, it would be a very good thing. Because if it wasn't for this kind of stuff, this place would be barren. It wasn't, in the early days, there was only one traffic light and one paved street in town. It's hard for you to imagine that, but it really wasn't much here, but I could see it was going to grow. And I realized it was going to be past as a professor, it was going to be past my ability to afford to live here.
But what advice do you give us as residents? Because we want to preserve. A lot of people, a lot of tourists come here to southern Baja, all of southern Baja, and we want to make that conscientious to have the less impact on our environment.
You have to say, what is it that's really good about this place? For some people, they're just coming here to have a vacation and a party and leave. And the most extreme version of that is spring break or something like that. But there are people who need a break and want to go someplace where the weather is nice and warm. My family went back, and they went back to freezing snow and freezing rain and, bad environment. And it's very nice to have a break when you come and do this. But you need to be able to cater to some people like that. But a lot of people who are like me, they come because it's a beautiful environment. It's really beautiful to look out over the sea. It's really beautiful to see the whales. I mean, I have the binoculars up. That's what else of your telescope. I had binoculars on the deck, and I could look out and see the whale spouts and see them coming around, and not have to even leave from breakfast. I mean, I'm just sitting there watching or working with my computer. Keeping the environment safe is the thing. And when I first came here, there was a big gap because the Rio was just very small, and there was a whole beach that was only for sea turtles. It was a reserve for sea turtles, and I helped them doing a little bit about trying to save the sea turtles, and that's but somehow that whole area got built up completely. And this time when we came in, we landed. We went to lunch at a seafood place, and I was joking about some stuff. But then we got to help 400 sea turtles get, it's Graciela arranged this for us. 400 sea turtles got poured out of the thing that came from the hatchery and put out on the beach, and then they have to struggle to find their way into the water. All I could do was stand there and make sure, wave that there were no seagulls coming to get them. But she got to touch them and help encourage them along, because some of them had been born much earlier and were tired. And they have to struggle through the sand and imprint on the beach before they go out in the sea. Unfortunately, as the time, also choose it when the tide is going to be right. And then they got to get in and get past the fish, and then they're going to be. And slowly, there was a very low point about 10 years ago, slowly the number of sea turtles is coming back. But the beaches are all built on. I mean, that means the people who live here have got to be conscious that the sea turtles are there, and they don't have to depend on if they're really careful and they pay attention during that time period, you won't have to depend on people getting in the sea turtle eggs, incubating them, and then bringing them back. You can coexist with them by saying, here's where you're allowed to put your your swimming stuff and your beach chairs. Let the sea turtles come in and go back out. But there's a lot of things like that. I mean, we all have plastic bottles of water. Well, we know that means there's a huge amount of microplastics that come out of every bottle, and then we get some when we drink it, but then they go out in the environment too, and then they get eaten by the animals and the fish, and then we eat them again, right? So we have to be thinking about it. And so I already talked to you about more electronic Destino magazine, although old people certainly still like to have things in their hand and read them, but the young people can look at them electronically, and we'll have to see. So there's a huge number of things we can do. It's more complicated than that. And the world supply chain is highly interconnected. And so when you buy paper here, as a tree gets cut down in a forest in Indonesia or something, you don't know where it's coming from, because they can cut it down, build it, put it in a boat, bring it everywhere in the world. And all of Mexico's prosperity is depending on free trade in the world. That a lot of, they have treaties with many, many countries that allow them to ship their products to those other countries without big tariffs. Well, that depends on that this whole supply chain thing keeps working and that free markets keep working. There's an issue. That's why why are the Houthis firing missiles at ships in the Red Sea important to Mexico? Well, because it disrupts the global supply chain and it threatens the free flow of goods out of Mexico to the rest of the world, because Mexico is not just selling to the US, it's selling worldwide.
And that causes an impact. Also, Tuesday that we met prior to this interview, you were mentioning to try to leave the less trace of plastic in your life, and that I got to think about that too.
Well, there's a whole lot of things you have to do, because when I was much younger and people were worried about the environment, we used to say, think globally but act locally. And that was a phrase, but I don't think people really understood that it wasn't them saying just do local stuff. The other side of that coin is what you do locally affects things globally now because of the way the world is structured. And I think it's really difficult to appreciate how global the world is for most people. But about 80% of the places in the world that can be mined are being mined. There's a demand for all those minerals and stuff. And when I've done the study about what we can do to get clean energy and clean the environment, the most reasonable, straightforward plan, assuming everybody got behind it, that I could figure out, it required that about 5 to 7% of the world GDP go into conversion to clean energy. You still have to be making energy the other way. And in addition to that, you have to mine 3 billion tons of more metals. Because if you're going to put up solar panels, you're going to put up power lines, you're going to do this, it's a huge amount. And now Mexico's a big country, so that's not so much per square meter, but you know, you pick a state like Sinaloa, it's like putting half a kilo on every square meter of the state. It's not a small amount of metal. It's got to be milled. And so if you start looking at what you can do about 5% per year. So it means if everybody who had skills was working hard and focused on doing the most they can to make clean energy sites, it will still take 20 years. Now, not everybody's trying to do that. Not all the best skilled people are working on converting things. It's going to probably take longer, but it depends on how much more desperate people are. But if it takes longer, it's going to cost more, because it costs more to take anything that drags out. But second of all, the need is going to go up more efficiently. So there's nobody who's sitting alone in the world anymore. You know, I ordered something on Amazon today, right? Where did that come from? Well, probably some stuff from China, probably some stuff from, there's no locality. Now, we may have a problem if the world breaks into segments. That'll be a serious problem. But the fact is, you are not acting locally anymore. You're acting locally, but it's a global effect you're doing. And it's a big issue for Mexico, because part of the people in Mexico believe it's a petrostate. Right?
That's correct.
But it's not just a petrostate. You still got to have food to eat. You still got to have a lot of other stuff. So there's a lot more that Mexico has to be much more than a petrostate. It's got to actually have growth in education and growth in behavior, but also care for the environment, right? So I was giving you an example. What are the favorite drinks? Some of the favorite drinks are those prize drinks in Mexico. Well, the tequila and mezcal, right? They're threatened by climate change. Why is that? They grow in a desert. They should be just fine. Well, it's not the plants growing. It's the fact they depend on the long-nosed Mexican bat for fertilization. You know, it's like it acts like the hummingbird or a bee to go in and cause the pollination. If that bat dies, there's no more tequila mezcal. The high demand for it is making more plants, people planting a lot more, but if they don't save the long-nosed Mexican bat or find thing, then there isn't going to be any. And so John said we should stock up on stuff. I said, I don't know how long it lasts. But there are issues you don't think about when you first start probing in there and looking carefully. Everything is very interconnected now. the world is not isolated like it was, when your parents were children. They lived in a small village. It's not isolated like that. Even in small villages now, people have cell phones.
And they're connected.
It's half the people in the world get on the internet by the cell phone. Well, that means half the people in the world got cell phones. I mean, it's already telling you there's a big impact on the world.
It's a lot to think about. And what can we do here locally, like start growing, like have like a garden that we can grow our own food, or what do you suggest?
Well, there you have the question of, are you changing the environment? Are you going to bring in new plants and animals that some are going to be invasive and disrupt the ones that are already here that some of us come to see, right? And so you have to be careful. It's like, who was the person that thought introducing rabbits to Australia was a good idea, right? It's like, now, who was the person that thought introducing humans to Australia was a good idea? Because all the big animals went extinct in a relatively short time after that, because the big animals reproduced too slowly, and humans killed them and ate them, and then they died out. And so you have to think carefully about what's going on and what's happening. And I look offshore on the Pacific side and I see shrimp boats. Well, that's great because I like shrimp, right? But some of the shrimp boats come from other countries or from other parts of Mexico, and are they going to overfish, right? Already it's clear that some of the big fish, like the marlin, are a little overfished in this area. But globally, the oceans are well overfished. There are a bunch of the big species of fish that are going to go extinct because there's just too few of them. And they can't mate and they can't reproduce to find the...
We were having a conversation on Tuesday with a local restaurateur here, and he was mentioning that before in the morning he would go to the arch and he would catch enough to come back and to prepare. This was 20-something years ago. Now it's not the same. It's not that abundant in fish.
And it was really clear in some other places. So long time ago, I went to Greece, and then went to the islands, and there's seafood. It's like, it was one of the cheaper things on the menu. And then I went back more recent years, the fish is one of the more expensive things on the menu. And yet here you are living in the middle of the Mediterranean, right? They've overfished, and there aren't so many big fish anymore. That hasn't happened here yet, but as the population of Baja goes up, it's going to become more of a risk. But also, foreign boats will come and fish here, right? So.
But one of the things that I see more and more with our followers is that they're more conscientious about the world, what they consume, what they use. And when we post something about the natural and the protector areas, we can see their reaction. And so that's also one of the things that also helped us to create content that is useful and that will help the planet. So we're just going to go to our first break, and then we'll come back. And we're back on Baja One by Destino. I'm your host, Dana Jimenez, and here with us our guest, Dr. George Smoot, and we're having the most fantastic and interesting conversation. And you can also listen in the future. No, I'm not exaggerating. This is pretty awesome. And then you can gonna be able to hear it also on our podcast on our webpage, and destinoloscabos.com, and you can also visit georgefsmoot.com for more information. So, Doctor, shall we talk about?
Okay.
This is your show. What
All
would
right,
you
this
like
is
to
my
talk
show.
about?
No, not quite. So,
you're the boss.
I'm a little bit down or off today, and the reason is when I got up this morning, I started, looking at my emails and reading the news, and there was an obituary for Arnold Penzias. You probably don't know who Arnold Penzias is, and I'd say probably no more than 5% of your listeners would know, but Arnold Penzias and Robert Wilson got the Nobel Prize for discovering what we call the cosmic background radiation, the radiation that proved that the universe came from a Big Bang. And he was somebody I knew and looked up to. It's like when you're young in a field and there are people who were the founders of the field, he was the kind of person that when I started out as a grad student, even an undergrad and then a grad student, that I was looking up to him and so forth. To explain what this means, if you look out at the sky at night, it is dark. This is much brighter here in the sunlight, right? Why is it dark? The answer is, if the universe, you can think the opposite, if the universe were infinite and had lasted forever, no matter where you looked, your line of sight would end as a star, and the night sky would be as bright as the sun. It would be quite toasty and everything, but it would be very light at night. So already we know from our own eyes that we look out at the sky, the universe is finite. Okay, now that's not too surprising before that, because there was arguments, 50 years before that, that said there's only one galaxy and the whole rest of the universe is whatever. Now, this was a problem that even vexed people back as far as Newton. He had a problem that he realized his laws of attraction meant that if you just fill the universe with stuff, it would collapse. So he wanted to make it infinite and make it go in all directions. And that turns out it can be okay, except it's unstable. You perturb it, and then you start local collapsing and so forth. And that's actually what we think happens in the universe now, is that it was pretty uniform and there were little perturbations and then there were local collapses, and that's what my work was about. But Fitzgerald Wilson discovered this, and it's one of the things that I chose to do research on, to study this radiation from the beginning of the universe, to explain how it's possible that we have the universe we see today. Because they look out and they saw the whole sky was uniformly covered with what we used to call the universal background glow. We had a computer named UDBug, which is universe diffuse. That sense of humor. And what they saw was, no matter where they looked, there was this uniform glow of radiation coming from the universe. Now, how could that be? Well, first of all, they were at the right place at the right time. They were hired to be radio astronomers by Bell Telephone Lab, which was considering to make satellites so that you could send telephone and TV and other radio signals up to satellites and then back down to the ground. Because before, the only way you could send them was by cable, and you had a few undersea cables, but it was limiting what's going on. They wanted to be able to send stuff by satellite. But they needed to know how bright was the night sky, how much noise was there, how much background. If you're trying to find something in the sun, it's much harder than trying to find it in the dark sky, and it's got a bright light. And so they hired these guys to do that, and they were very good and very careful. They did this series of experiments with this big radio telescope that Bell Telephone built for them, and they built a special device which has got a liquid helium dewar in it, so that's 3 Kelvin, 4 Kelvin normally under a regular atmosphere. And they fixed everything up. They did an incredible experience because they kept finding there was this background, this 3 degrees above absolute zero, 3 Kelvin, right? So it's centigrade. They carefully did all these tests. They cleaned the pigeons out of the antenna and cleaned the antenna. They took the receiver, they did everything. And they kept finding that no matter where they looked, there was this glow. In a few places, like on the galactic plane, they saw a little extra signal, but that was it. That is proof that at one time, now when you understand it, that at one time the universe was as bright as the sun. In fact, it was brighter, but at that time, there was a time when it, no matter where you looked, it was as bright as the sun. But the universe has been expanding ever since then, and it's expanded more than 1,000 times since that epoch. And the wavelengths of all of the light have all been stretched by 1,000 times, and they've moved from the visible down into the millimeter microwaves, just a little above your radio waves, right? Your centimeter wavelengths. It's quite incredible. So you have this light that came from when the universe was extremely younger and smaller than now, and in sort of human terms, it's like 12 hours after conception for you now, compared to you now. And that means it's really light coming from the embryo universe. And I understood that. I decided that was a good thing to do research in. Joe Silk, who was at Harvard at the time, a graduate student at Harvard at the time, he's finishing up his thesis. He was saying, how does a galaxy survive that? If you take our galaxy and put it into a big sun, what happens to it? Well, it gets melted, it actually vaporized, and it falls all apart. How do the galaxies make it through this primordial fireball to the present? I knew at that point that if you could study that radiation and understand it, it was going to be important. Either there was something new making that radiation, or something, there was a primordial fireball, and it's going to be the secrets of the universe, right? How can you go wrong? Right? So you pick that for a topic. And so then I started going to conferences over the night, met Penzias and Wilson, their various conferences, and their personalities were extremely different. One was very aggressive and very, pushy and so forth about various things. But the other one was very nice, as I could do. With his very first paper, got him a Nobel Prize.
Oh my goodness.
It's pretty easy. You wrote one paper in your life, you have a Nobel Prize. You're set for life, right? You got a professorship, and then you're all done. Anyway, I had a really interesting experience with him because we were at a conference in Copenhagen, and they arranged an outing for us to go by small boats to heaven. So Heaven, H-E-V-E-N, is an island that the king gave to Tycho Brahe to do astronomical observations. And he built a place called Uraniaborg. Unfortunately, he built this big thing, and he put the astronomical observatories up on the second floor out in these porch-like balconies, and so it vibrated a little bit. But Tycho Brahe is the one that took all the data that eventually Kepler got his laws out of. So we were going there, we're riding this boat, and he's holding on like I was holding on those bouncy hovercraft boats. And I didn't appreciate it at the time. I was just so glad to be able a chance to talk to him privately. And he's thinking, don't let me fall over in the water. But he was very nice, and he's always been nice. And it's quite amazing that it wasn't that other people hadn't seen evidence like this or something. They just did a really careful job and ruled everything out and said, yes, there is this stuff coming. And people jumped on it immediately and said, okay, this means there was a Big Bang, there was all this kind of stuff. And there were all these fights that went on between Gamow and Fred Hoyle and so forth. But this kind of was the beginning of the end for the stuff. I kept running into him periodically, and then I didn't see him for a while. He sort of disappeared. He stepped down as he was head of Bell Lab for some time, and he disappeared. And then I ran into him at a conference in South Bay, San Francisco, and turns out he was running basically a venture capital firm that was, putting money into alternative energies, because this was 2 energy crises before that, and he had picked out various companies and got people to invest in them, and he got a piece of it. So, and he was running that, and he was very famous in southern San Francisco area, Silicon Valley area, for running this investment firm on alternative energies. And they didn't know he had the Nobel Prize, right? It's like that. And he started talking to me more as an equal, because I just got my prize. And so that's one of the changes.
Nobel Prize to Nobel Prize winner.
Yeah, but the fact is, I think he was missing the old days when he was doing science and, having the excitement of learning about the universe instead of being out there grubbing for money. But he apparently made quite a lot of money with his venture capital firm, at least at the beginning. He had basically Alzheimer at the end of his life, and then he died from that. But it just brings up a bunch of stuff for me.
I'm sorry that you had that passing today. I'm so sorry.
It hadn't happened a day or two ago, but today was when I first learned of it. It's the kind of thing where you see a whole mixture of personalities and work they've done and what's going on, but it's the passing of a major milestone. I mean, it's a big thing. I'm transitioning now into the question you had of what was it like for winning the Nobel Prize, and I'll run through it backwards a little bit. So they have Nobel Week in December. They make the announcements in October, and then your life is turned upside down and everything goes crazy. And then they have in December, early December, they have the actual Nobel ceremonies, and it's several days. you have certain events that you do on different days, including a concert. And first you have to show up there and make sure you have all the right equipment, And the last day, that's the official part of the week, they take you back to the Nobel Institute. In my case, some very officious guys brought me in and they started to talk to me, and they brought a special photographer in and took a picture of me, and they said, "Do you know what this picture's for?" And I said, "I don't know. It's an official thing," because they were bringing the Nobel laureates in at one at a time. And they said, "It's because we're going to put you in this book." And they bring out this book and they flop it over, and there's Albert Einstein.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I mean, it's a big picture of Albert with his signature on there and the date, right? And I'm sure they practiced flopping over that page just to make you feel bad, because am I ready to be in a book with Albert Einstein, right? Well, the answer is clearly no. I already had this problem before. One of the things that our physicist convinced me to do was take one of the, I'd save pieces from the satellite that we made prototypes of last time, and I'd save pieces, and some went to the Smithsonian, some went to my laboratory, but I saved one, and he convinced me to give it to the Deutsches Museum. And he said he had arranged to give the end of their horn antenna, the liquid nitrogen target, the receiver and the switch and so forth, and the chart recorder on which they recorded their data. Do you understand how primitive that was? They had a pen drive chart recorder, and that's how they recorded the data. And they said, here it is, look at liquid helium. Here it is looking at the sky. Here it is looking at room temperature. And it's on there, and you can see their handwritten notes on the thing. It's in the museum. He said, you should put your stuff in. And he said, when I was a young boy, I went to the Deutsches Museum, which is the science and technology museum, and I saw how ships are built and how they're made and how this is happening, how airplanes are. Also, this made me interested in being stuff. I found out later that when he was 6 years old, his family was arrested by the Nazis and put on a train to Poland, and Poland refused to take any more Jews at the time and sent them back. And so then he was put on a kinder train with his younger brother and went off to live with families in England and so forth. And then his family, his mother and father, managed to get out, and they reunited and they moved to the United States. And he told another person, which I hadn't known before, that he did it because he thought it was good for the young kids to see that, but also for the Germans to see what they'd missed. But he didn't tell me that part. He just told me it was good because 2 million people a year come there. And so earlier than that, when I was first doing that kind of stuff, I'm going, wait a minute, I'm not old enough to have stuff in a museum. Well, now, how am I going to be in a book with Albert Einstein? I wasn't old enough yet. Well, now I'm getting to be old enough.
But you are, and that is amazing. That is something that very few people in the world.
I'm hoping that some kids later on look at it and they turn to my page and say, "Oh, I'm not ready to be in a book with this guy yet."
and that will happen. We have some questions from our followers. This one is from Josie Jimenez. And she wants to know who and what inspires your critical thinking and creativity.
The answer is there were people who inspired me before. I used to be Fermi and Einstein. Unfortunately, now a longer hindsight, I've seen that Einstein's had a somewhat bigger impact, even though I thought Fermi was an amazing guy because he did both theory and experiment. And if you saw Oppenheimer, you saw him briefly he didn't get much of a starring role in that picture, but Madame Curie. So when I got the Nobel Prize, I had been scheduled to go to a meeting about doing a new satellite in France. They postponed the meeting. It was right during the time I was going to get the Nobel. They postponed the meeting for 5 days so I could go. So I went to that meeting, and while I was there, they said, "Is there anything you want to do?" And I said, "Oh, I'd like to see Marie Curie's lab and so forth." They saved her lab completely. And I went in and I have a picture of me sitting behind her desk. And they said, "By the way, her desk is radioactive." And they brought and they brought in a Geiger counter, and it goes her desk. They didn't understand stuff. Her desk was hot as could be. She was storing pieces of curium and plutonium and stuff. Well, not plutonium, but various radioactive materials that she's working with. And they have in that place, they have a nice little museum of all the things that you could buy that had radioactivity in them because it was good for your health. And when that first time I went to Italy and Greece, they used to advertise on the bottle of the water what the radioactivity was, and because people thought that was a good thing. They didn't understand
Wow.
what the environmental impact was. And it takes a while to learn that, but it's amazing what she did. And she just worked really hard and was really smart, right? Am I ready to be like her? So she inspired me, but the fact is, there comes a time when you inspire yourself, when you can't help, you got so used to thinking and doing stuff, you can't help yourself. You try and think about things, and you try and stuff, and you try and figure out how to be more creative and think out of the box and do a different kind of way. And part of that comes from trying to teach students. Do you realize how hard it is to teach people to do stuff? It's like, I had a sign in my office in Hong Kong that says, I try to improve and make things more idiot-proof, but they keep making better idiots. You know?
Oh my God, okay. We have 3 minutes to go. Before we go, there's just one more question, and he's from one of our followers, Roberto de Jesus Perez. He met you in La Paz some years ago. He sent us a picture that he has with you, and his question is, after all of your studies about space, do you believe in God?
There you go. How about in many of them? No, it's a complicated question. And so usually I duck answering this question because it's the God is a relationship between the individual and themselves. And there are many people looking for an authority to tell them what's good. Whereas in fact, they need to make the connection to the world, the universe, and just like the environment here, but the universe is way bigger than the environment here. And they need to make the connection to the universe and figure out for themselves how they can be spiritual and how they can do the right thing.
Excellent. Well, Dr. George Smoot, thank you so much for coming on our show. It's a shame that we are ready to, we have to go. There's another program coming up. And thank you for coming, and I wish that you join us in the future.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
And thank you to the exit team, thank you to Chilapa and the controls, and to all of our Destino team, and we see you next week. I am Dana Jimenez, your host, on Baja 101.